Okay, so this time you've given us a really interesting topic. Basically, it's all about risk assessment,
Hmm.
particularly when it comes to flying. Now, even if you aren't a pilot,
Right.
trust me how pilots think about potential problems up in the air, it can actually give you a really good framework for thinking about risk down here on the ground in all sorts of situations. And so that's what this deep dive is really all about, is how to sort of unlock that mindset.
Yeah, and we've been looking through these sources that you sent us and focusing primarily on this document called RMH FFH4.pdf, which, as you said, really gets into the nitty-gritty of risk assessment, specifically from a flight context.
Right.
But the goal isn't to make you a pilot overnight, but to really sort of get to those core principles.
Yeah.
Just that fundamental idea of how to identify risk and then how to evaluate it so that you come away from this feeling really well informed about risk and maybe even able to see it in a new light, even if you never actually get off the ground.
Right. Okay, so let's just jump right in. The document starts with a very fundamental step once you've identified a potential hazard.
Hmm.
You need a way to figure out just how risky it is,
Right.
and they call this risk assessment.
That's right.
And it's not just a hunch or a feeling, it's a very systematic approach.
Right.
And importantly, it's a skill
Hmm.
that you get better at the more you use it.
Yeah, absolutely. What I find so fascinating is that they
Right.
really kind of break down risk
Yeah.
to its fundamental components,
Yeah.
which are really twofold. First is the likelihood or the probability of something happening.
Hmm.
And then the second is the severity or how bad the consequences could be if it does happen.
Right.
And what's important to realize about those two things is that both of them can exist on a scale.
Yeah.
It's not just a yes, no, or good, bad kind of scenario.
Right. Okay, well, so let's unpack this idea of likelihood a
Okay.
bit more.
Okay.
The document uses 4 terms to describe how probable an event might be.
Okay.
So the first one is probable, meaning it's very likely to happen,
Hmm.
maybe even many times.
Okay.
And the example they give to make this concrete is exceeding the structural limits of an aircraft if you fly through a thunderstorm,
Oh, yeah.
which is something that's likely to happen every single time.
Right. Yeah.
Then we have occasional,
Oh.
which means that an event could happen sometime.
Right.
The example here is a runway overrun
Okay.
at an airport with very short runways surrounded by rough terrain. It might not happen every time,
Right.
but it's a real possibility.
Yeah, over time.
Then there's remote.
Okay.
This is where something's unlikely to occur, but it's still possible.
Right.
Now, they don't give a direct example here in this part of the document,
Okay.
but we will see this in the case study that we get to later.
Gotcha.
And then finally, there's improbable,
Okay.
which means that an event is highly unlikely to ever occur.
Right. Yeah.
So it's the spectrum from very likely to very unlikely.
It is a spectrum. Yeah.
Okay, let's turn to severity,
Okay.
which is all about what could happen if the hazard leads to a bad outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So they also have 4 terms
Mhm.
for this, and the most serious is catastrophic,
Right.
which means the event could lead to fatalities or the complete loss of the aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
Circling back to the thunderstorm example,
Yeah.
that could absolutely have a catastrophic outcome.
Right.
Then we have critical,
Okay.
which means severe injuries or major damage to the aircraft or other property.
Mm-hmm.
And the short runway overrun example
Right.
would fit there. It might not always result in fatalities,
Right.
but it could certainly cause major damage to the aircraft
Mhm.
and maybe some severe injuries.
Yeah.
And then we have marginal,
Okay.
which would be minor injuries or minor damage to the aircraft or property. So, for example, maybe there's some performance issue,
Yeah.
which leads to a rough landing,
Right.
maybe some superficial damage.
Yeah.
That would be marginal. And then finally, the least severe is negligible,
Right.
meaning any injury or damage would be very, very minor.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these 2 scales.
Right.
One for the probability of an event
Mm-hmm.
and one for the impact of the event.
Yeah.
And then the really interesting thing is how these are brought together to give us a sort of comprehensive understanding of risk. And this is where this risk assessment matrix comes
Well,
in.
that's the matrix. Yeah.
This is a visual tool that helps you combine likelihood and severity
Right.
to determine the overall level of risk.
Mm-hmm.
So picture a table
Okay.
with one axis being the likelihood,
Okay.
probable, occasional, remote, improbable,
Right.
and the other axis being the severity,
Okay.
catastrophic, critical, marginal, negligible.
Mm-hmm.
And where they intersect
Yeah.
reveals the risk level.
Right.
And they actually color code this
They do, yeah.
to make it very clear.
Yeah, it's very intuitive.
So high-risk scenarios are highlighted in red.
Right.
Serious risks are in yellow.
Mm-hmm.
And then low to medium risks are in green. Yeah.
So taking our thunderstorm example,
Okay.
if the severity is catastrophic
Mm-hmm.
and the likelihood is probable or occasional,
Right.
that puts you squarely in the red.
Yeah.
High risk.
High risk.
The runway overrun
Okay.
with critical severity
Right.
and occasional likelihood.
Yeah.
That puts you in the yellow serious.
Mm-hmm.
And the document makes it very clear what these different risk levels mean in terms of making a decision.
Yeah.
So green, meaning low to medium risk, generally means go ahead.
Right.
But it's still wise to look for ways to reduce that risk
Right.
even further if you can.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yellow or red, however serious or high,
Right.
that basically means no go.
Yeah.
Unless you can find a way to mitigate the risk,
Right.
bring it down to medium or low through some sort of reassessment and adjustments.
Yeah.
And this isn't something that you just do on the spur of the moment right before you're about to do the thing.
They emphasize that risk analysis should ideally happen well in advance of the actual event.
Right.
Hours, days, weeks beforehand, depending on how complex the situation is.
Right.
So, for a relatively simple flight, it might be a few hours.
Right.
But for more complex operations, you need to give yourself more time
Absolutely.
to really think it through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this kind of gets into this idea that using this matrix is not some sort of magic bullet.
Right.
There are ways that you can go wrong.
Right.
And they point out several key areas where errors can sort of creep in.
Right.
The first is simply accuracy.
Right.
So the output that you get from this matrix
Yeah.
is only as good as the inputs that you put into it.
Yeah.
So if you're uncertain about either the likelihood or the severity,
Yeah.
their advice is to lean toward the more conservative option,
Right.
which will push you to a higher risk level.
Right.
Especially when you're first learning this.
Yeah.
It's always good to get input from someone who is maybe a little more experienced.
Yeah, because you wouldn't want to underestimate a problem
Mhm.
because you aren't quite sure how
Right.
likely it is or how severe it is.
Right.
And then there's what they call skewing,
Oh, yeah.
which is, I think, a very human tendency.
It is, yeah.
When you really want to do something,
Right.
there's a temptation to fudge the numbers a little bit,
Yeah.
to nudge that likelihood or
Yeah.
severity
Yeah.
down a little bit on the scale so that you arrive at an acceptable risk assessment.
Yeah, that's right. I think you can see this a lot where, there's a real desire to accomplish a certain task or meet a deadline or whatever.
Right.
And that desire to achieve that goal can sometimes unconsciously influence your assessment of the risk.
Yeah, and you might not even be aware of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the last potential pitfall that they mention is obsolescence.
Right.
That things can change rapidly. Weather patterns can change. Equipment can develop unexpected issues.
Yeah.
So a risk assessment that you did yesterday might not be valid today.
Yeah.
So it's really important to constantly be reviewing and reevaluating based on the latest information.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've covered these fundamental principles.
Right.
Identifying hazards.
Yeah.
Assessing their likelihood and severity, and using this matrix to sort of figure out what the overall risk level is.
Yeah.
Now, to see how all this comes together in a real-world situation, the document provides a detailed case study about a pilot named Tricia who's planning a flight.
Okay.
And this is where it really starts to come to life.
Yeah, this is where the rubber meets the road.
So Tricia is planning a nonstop flight from Animas Air Park in Colorado to Santa Rosa, California.
Yeah.
And she systematically conducts a risk assessment using what's known as the PAVE checklist. Pilot, aircraft environment, and external pressures.
Okay.
So for each of these categories, she goes through and she identifies the hazards.
Right.
She assesses the likelihood and severity of those hazards and so on.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with pilot.
Okay.
She identifies a couple key risk factors here.
Yeah.
First, her proficiency with IFR.
Right.
Instrument flight rules, meaning flying in conditions where you can't see the ground, is a bit rusty.
Okay.
She believes that loss of control in flight, or LOCI, is possible, though unlikely.
Right.
But if it were to happen, especially in bad weather,
Mm-hmm.
the consequences would be catastrophic.
Yeah.
So she rates that as remote likelihood,
Right.
catastrophic severity, which puts her in the yellow serious risk on the matrix.
Serious risk. Okay.
She also uses the IMSAFE checklist to sort of consider her physical and mental state, and she flags alcohol,
Right.
even just sort of residual effects and
Yeah.
fatigue as potential hazards. Okay. She estimates that these could lead to in-flight errors with occasional likelihood,
Right.
and the severity could be critical, potentially resulting in major damage or injury.
Right.
So again, that's serious risk.
That's serious.
Yellow on the matrix. So just from the pilot factors, we're
Right.
seeing some yellow flags here.
Yeah.
Moving on to the aircraft,
Okay.
she identifies 3 main areas of concern.
Right.
The first is that because it's a nonstop flight, there's a higher chance of running out of fuel if she has to deviate
Right.
from her planned route due to bad weather, for example. So fuel exhaustion, especially over this mountainous terrain, is something that she considers to be remote likelihood but catastrophic consequences, which is serious risk. Then her aircraft is not equipped for flying in known icing conditions, and the weather forecast suggests there might be some icing present. Now, even though that's only occasional likelihood, if she were to encounter icing, that could lead to controlled flight into terrain or a loss of control, both of which are catastrophic.
Right.
So that puts that in the red zone.
Yeah. High risk.
Finally, under aircraft, she looks at the takeoff performance from the 5,000-foot runway at Animas Air Park. And with her passengers and her luggage and the fuel that she needs for this nonstop flight, she'd be operating right at the maximum weight for this aircraft. And her calculations show that the required runway length, even with a safety margin, is longer than what's available. So she assesses that as an occasional likelihood critical severity.
Yeah.
Which is serious risk.
Serious risk.
Now we get to the environment.
Okay.
And this is where the risks really start to multiply.
Yeah.
So the weather forecast for her intended route includes the possibility of thunderstorms, icing, and low cloud ceilings.
Yeah.
So she believes that there's an occasional chance of encountering some severe turbulence within those thunderstorms.
Right.
And a severe upset in turbulence could lead to a loss of control, which is catastrophic. So that's high risk.
Yeah.
The terrain along her route is also a factor.
Right.
If she were to try to fly under those low ceilings in poor visibility, the terrain presents a risk of what's called controlled flight into terrain.
Yeah.
She considers this remote for a pilot with her experience.
Right.
But the outcome is catastrophic. So that's serious risk.
Serious.
And then there's high density altitude at Animas Air Park.
Right.
So basically the air acts like it's at a much higher altitude than it actually is, which affects the performance of the aircraft.
Right.
So at over 6,600 feet with summer temperatures, this reduced aircraft performance combined with the high terrain could lead to a CFIT accident with an occasional likelihood, which again is high risk.
High risk.
So it's quite striking how all of these factors really combine to create a very risky environment.
They do. Yeah.
Finally, we get to external pressures.
Okay.
Trisha and her passengers have some meetings scheduled, and she feels the pressure to get them to Santa Rosa on time.
Right.
She also doesn't want to let her friends down. She recognizes that these external pressures are actually amplifying the other risks that are already present, making a catastrophic outcome more probable.
Yeah.
Which means that this is a high-risk situation.
Right.
So as you can see from Trisha's analysis, she's identified a lot of hazards across all of these PAVE categories, and a lot of them are falling into this serious or even high-risk category. Yeah. And it really illustrates how a seemingly straightforward flight can actually involve a very complex interplay of potential risks.
Absolutely. And that's why I think this is such a valuable tool.
Yeah.
Because it really forces you to systematically go through.
Yeah.
Think through all of the different factors that could be at play. Assess them consistently.
Yeah.
And get a much clearer picture of the overall risk.
Yeah.
It's not just about one big hazard.
Right.
Often it's a combination of these seemingly small things that can really come together to create a large risk.
Yeah.
So the takeaways here, I think, are very clear. Risk assessment is fundamentally about figuring out the likelihood of a hazard
Right.
and the potential severity of that hazard,
Yeah.
and then using a tool like this risk assessment matrix to figure out the overall risk level.
Right.
And it's absolutely essential that you try to be accurate in your assessment of the likelihood and severity.
Yeah.
And try to avoid this tendency to downplay risk
Yeah.
when you really want to
Right.
do something.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, this was a slight specific example,
Yeah.
but these principles apply
Yeah.
to a wide range of decisions
Yeah.
that we all face in our lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So bringing this back to you, our listener,
Right.
even if you don't fly airplanes,
Yeah.
you encounter decisions with potential risks
Absolutely.
every day.
Yeah.
And we've shown you how this framework of assessing likelihood
Right.
and severity works in one particular context.
Yeah.
I think there's this aha moment where you see how these
Yeah.
different pieces fit together.
Yeah.
So I guess this raises a very important question,
Yeah. What is that?
which is thinking about these different levels of risk.
Yeah.
Low, serious, highs,
Mm.
and the factors that contribute to them.
Yeah.
What's one area of your life where this kind of more formal risk assessment might reveal some surprising insights or
Yeah.
help you make better choices?
Right.
You know, and particularly think about those situations where you might be subconsciously skewing your evaluation
Yeah.
because you have a strong desire for a particular outcome.
Right.
The answer might surprise you.
Yeah.
So I think this deep dive into risk assessment
Right.
really gives you a good foundation
Yeah.
for thinking about any decision that you make.
Yeah.
It's not about being overly cautious.
Right.
It's just about being well-informed
Yeah.
and making your choices
Mhm.
with a clear understanding of what could happen.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Great to be here.
I hope you enjoyed it.